And joining us now, MPP Randy Hillier from the riding of Lanark, Frontenac, Lennox and Addington. He's also the chair of Partners with Rural Ontario Task Force. Nice of you to join us tonight at TVO.
It's great to be here.
Good to have you here. Let me just go through the 4 points of the task force to get started so people can understand what you're all about, and then we'll come back and talk. The Pro Task Force wants to, number one, mend the provincial government's relationship with municipal governments, look into that issue, look into improving the delivery of provincial government services to rural Ontario, removing the economic and regulatory obstacles standing in the way of rural Ontario's prosperity, and of course boost economic development in rural Ontario. Now, Randy, let's go through this point by point by point by point. Number one, what's wrong with the provincial government's relationship with the municipal governments today?
Oh, yeah, significant. When we were in Belleville at the Belleville meetings just last week, Steve, some of the phrases and the terminology that municipal leaders were using were that they have hit the wall. They have hit the wall.
Over what?
A continuous increasing expectation of delivery of services from them, a continuing increasing expectation of raising standards, which have a cost involved to them.
Expectations coming from the province
to them. To the, this is standards on whether it be fire services, ambulances, police services. Always the standards are increasing, and there is a significant cost included in that component. So the standards are increasing, but the province is not giving them any vehicle or any means to generate the revenues.
Or money, that's the main thing, right?
I had some mayors suggesting that, like Toronto, they need greater powers of taxation so that they can generate the revenues to meet the province's standards, or, and from the smaller rural municipalities, is a definite requirement that the standards and expectations start being diminished and reduced.
Okay, but how much of this can you attribute to, there's always tension between different levels of government, the feds to the provinces to the municipalities. How much of that is just wrapped up in all of that?
Well, there is an element, a definite element, and I think it's highlighted and illustrated even more so with the relationship between the municipal and the provincial government. We know that the feds and the province have set jurisdictions, areas of concern and authority, but that isn't the same with our municipalities. The province can change and dictate the terms of the relationship at any time they want, and it doesn't matter what political stripe you've come from. We have seen that throughout the last 20 years at least, where there's a constant change in expectations and relationship between the province and the municipalities.
Okay, let's go down the chart again. Point number two, what's wrong with the way that the provincial government services are delivered in rural Ontario right now?
Well, a lot of our provincial legislation and regulations have been cast off to third-party agency, boards, commissions, authorities, which are not accountable. They're not accountable to ministers, they're not accountable to people. And we've seen probably MPAC is the best example that comes into everybody's mind. Here we have a third-party agency that is doing the assessment. It allows property taxes, and it allows government, it allows politicians like myself, if I was in government, to deflect any circumstances. We can put it off and say, well, that's MPAC doing that, not us. And people don't have any place to turn. Turn to the politicians, well, again, it's a third-party agency. And we've also beginning to see that now with the LHINs as well, the local health integration networks, where they're buffering or shielding politicians from responsibility.
Actually, I went to the news conference where you unveiled this Pro Task Force not too long ago, and the example you gave at the news conference might have been the best one. This was the Bob Mackey, who's running the archery range in Lincoln, Ontario.
Absolutely.
Niagara Peninsula, and the Niagara Escarpment Commission has a problem with him being there.
That's right. And not just a problem, but they have said that he can't be there. He has to close up his business. And although the local municipal government want him there, want his tax base, want his revenues, want his contribution to the community, an unelected, unaccountable third-party commission, in this case, has said, no, we don't view him acceptable.
But presumably, and I don't know, I haven't talked to the commission, but presumably the Niagara Escarpment Commission has some other criteria that it is following, that it believes is more imperative for the land that he's on right now, and that's why their position is their position.
But again, we go back, I'm sure they have a position and an interpretation and whatever else. But what it comes down to is here is a unelected, unaccountable commission who is overturning or usurping the proper jurisdiction and authority of the municipal government, that of zoning. That is a fundamental role of our municipal governments.
Okay, but you know why these agencies, boards, and commissions were created in the first place.
Absolutely.
You know, because there was a lot of shenanigans going on in municipal councils, and the province thought it needed an agency in place to oversee some of that.
Yeah, and you know, let's be realistic here. There will always...
I'm not saying that's happening here,
No.
just for the record.
No,
but that's
but
the history.
You cannot create a perfect society. But the best thing we can do is, if somebody is involved in shenanigans, if they're on the political side, they can be unelected, right? The boards can't be. That's one, we have lost our check and balance on authority. And we have created over 1,000 agency boards and commissions in this province. We have got a huge bureaucracy of unelected, unaccountable people making decisions, and neither politicians nor people have a vehicle or a means to remove them from office.
Okay, I appreciate your position that they get in the way of locally elected, you know, duly elected people making decisions that they were elected to do. But on the other hand, these commissions were created by governments of all stripes.
Absolutely.
To do a job.
Yeah.
Do you think that they don't serve that role anymore?
I don't think they serve democracy well. I don't think they are, you know, in general, there are exceptions to every rule, but in general, they are not serving us very well at all. If there are tough decisions that need to be made in a community or in a province, it ought to be politicians who can be removed if they don't make good decisions. That's fundamental in a democracy.
Okay, point 3 on your chart, removing regulatory obstacles to economic growth. What regulatory obstacle is in place right now that's preventing someone in rural Ontario from making a living?
Those 1,000 agency boards and commissions
part
are
of that.
full of them. You know, Bob Mackey is one of them. I had a case with Mapledale Farms up in Belleville, who will have to go out of business under the present condition, much like Forfar Cheese up in my way that has announced that they've closed down production. Here is a case where we've brought in an environmental regulation that says you cannot put the wastewater from cheese production, and when they wash out their vats, they cannot spread it on their land. But what they've done is they've created a situation, an environmental regulation where there is no solution for rural Ontario. You can't spread it on your land. There is no municipal treatment facilities anywhere nearby, so you must close up. And you know, that's just one example. We've also seen it with sawmills. We've seen it with a number of industries. But these are downtown Toronto regulations made, much like Bill 126.
Okay, but hang on.
That are putting people out of work, driving our industry out of business, and making the cost of doing business in this province too expensive.
I know it is I mean, I've heard it for 25 years. It's tempting to be able to say those buggers at Queen's Park don't understand us. They're downtown, they're urban, they're centralized. Well, I know, I've heard it over and over again. But there's a reason why, and I'm not taking their side, I'm just saying there's a reason why a lot of these regulations are created in the first place. There were, you know, for example, unsafe farming practices, which led to fecal coliform counts in the water, that et cetera, and here we go.
Well, I would disagree with that.
I'm sure.
You know, it wasn't unsafe farming practices. You know, I'm sure you're alluding to Walker.
I wasn't actually, just because I know that wasn't the case there.
It wasn't the case there. You know, there. You know, what we're seeing now is a cleansing of our industry in rural Ontario. We're making it the cost to stay in business exorbitant, and it can't compete. So, you know, how safe are we going to be when we're all on welfare and you cannot be productive, contributing members of society?
As you know, 80% of the people who live in this province live within about, what, an hour or two of the U.S. border.
Yeah.
And rural Ontario's voice has gotten sort of smaller and quieter as the years have gone on. Would you acknowledge that you are, in some respects, spitting into the wind with what you're trying to do here?
Well, that may be one way to phrase it.
I tried to pick a nice rural way of putting it.
But, you know, democracy, you know, the fundamental of democracy is for everyone to have a voice and not to create injustice because of a majority. You know, minority rights and our whole basis of law is based on equality, no matter if you're in rural Ontario or urban Ontario.
That's true, but there's economic realities at play here, particularly right now, where the reality is
significant realities
smacking you in the face.
And this is where we have to start looking. You know, if somebody is in business in Toronto and has access to municipal treatment, you know, that's he's not harmed by that regulation. But so when we make our regulations, we should be cognizant and we should be aware of the hardship and the consequences that we're placing on those people that we can't see from Queen's Park.
You don't think we are right now?
Oh, absolutely not.
Do you think the rural lifestyle is sustainable?
Absolutely. It is. It can be sustainable, but it can't be sustainable if it's always being interfered with. If we're going to put urban expectations on rural Ontario, then it won't be sustainable. If we're going to suggest to everybody in rural Ontario that you need the same 5-minute response time by a fire truck as you have in Toronto, we're not going to be able to afford it. You know, we would have to put a fire station on every second concession road. Can't be done. So we need to recognize that the expectations are different in rural Ontario than they are in urban Ontario.
Do you think some rural communities are literally not going to survive the next couple of years as the economy goes down?
Oh, absolutely. There's, you know, I'll give you another example. I won't name the village, but there's a village of 300 people in my riding, 300 homes that is being, that needs a new water treatment, water and sewer, to meet the standards. Right? That water and sewer program for that village of 300 towns is costed at $30 million. $30 million.
They can't afford that, obviously.
It's over $100,000 per home just for water and sewer.
Right.
Okay? And with little expectation of much help from Queen's Park. You know, how can anybody afford that? So we need to, again, recognize what is practical as well as what is reasonable in our approach.
Part of the deal, though, I know you know this, and living in rural Ontario, is no one expects the same level of services they get in urban Ontario. You know that, right?
The people who live there don't, right. but the people who are delivering the services are demanding it.
Many people who live in cities have cottages or visit friends in rural Ontario all the time.
Yep.
And yet there doesn't seem to be a kind of a connection in political power. Do you know what I'm saying? When it comes time to lobby in Queen's Park, they're lobbying for their cities, not necessarily their connection to rural Ontario.
Well,
Why do you think that is?
Well, you know, you're there for a short, people who work and earn their livings in rural Ontario, you know, it's different if you're just in there for a visit. Everything is tranquil and peaceful when you're up at the cottage having a beer on the dock or something, and you're not talking to the people like Forfar Cheese or Mapledale Cheese or any of the other hundreds and thousands of businesses that are facing troubles. You're not being exposed to those hardships. And if you're not exposed to them, if you don't understand them, how can you come back here and lobby for them?
In which case, tell people who live in the big cities of this province, which is most of the people, tell them one thing about rural Ontario that you think they don't get right now.
I don't think they have the same level of understanding of our desire to be self-reliant, to be independent. You know, we look at government as in more of a non-interventionist role. We're not dependent on them on government for anything. You know, we want them there for our roads, want them there for, you know, those basic services, but we don't want them there for everything. We can take care of ourselves quite adequately with just a minimum level of service. You know, and I'll just add, the people in rural Ontario, the people I meet, and I meet a lot of them, are too busy trying to earn a living, trying to get through that red tape, trying to get over those obstacles to actually be able to spend the time to lobby their politicians. We don't have the universities and the academics in rural Ontario to help take up the fight for them.
And that's why you're doing your task force.
Absolutely.
Gotcha. Randy Hillier, MPP for Lanark, Frontenac, Lennox and Addington. Good of you to join us tonight on TVO.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.